Good morning. I'm Dr. Maximilian Fuentes Fuhrmann. Thank you so much for tuning in today. You can watch this live on Facebook Live and iTunes and Spotify and YouTube later on. Celebrate that you're understanding this technology. I'm a clinical psychologist and gerontologist. I am not a physician, so that if you have questions and comments related to medical concerns, we can find other resources for you. Last week the show was about what is aging, because if we're going to age well, we need to figure out what the heck is aging. And some of the things were kind of depressing to some of you, I could tell, about what happens with your vision or what happens with your hearing, all these sort of things. Today we're going to be showing some inspirational people and talking about them. We're going to really cover the topic as much as we can about why does aging happen in the first place. It is true that you don't really need to know why something happens to be able to stop it. Like, we don't really need to know why cancer happens to stop it. But it still, I think, is part of this picture in gerontology of us really getting to the roots of what the heck is actually happening versus what not is happening. So many people we've talked about in the last show about thinking that pain is part of aging. Pain is really not ever part of aging. And we're going to be starting this morning by showing this amazing man in his late 70s. His name is Jacinto Bonilla. And he sort of went viral as this CrossFit guru. And so I always like to show images as much as I'm able to of people that are aging well and defying certainly the stereotypes that you might have had from the previous show that, oh, the older that you get, the harder it is on you. You know, you can't hardly move, you can't stand up, you have pain, debilitation. So let's take a few seconds, and we're going to be seeing 3 clips today of Mr. Jacinto Bonilla.
In our new series, Living Stronger, we're celebrating older Americans whose zest for life is an inspiration for people of every age. Here's Michelle Miller at the gym.
At this high-intensity workout in New York City, Jacinto Bonilla is redefining what it means to be physically fit. For an hour, Bonilla keeps up with the repetitious CrossFit routine, jumping on a 24-inch box, doing upside-down push-ups, and climbing a 15-foot rope, all alongside.
So I bet that a lot of you are like, wow, how can a person that age do those kinds of things? Well, he says that he wants to, and we all age at different rates, and we're having guests on the show that certainly are aging at different rates than I am or other people. But we're going to start off by looking at our first slide, which would have some relevance to Mr. Bonilla. Our first slide that talks about the major theories of why we age. And I had shared with you last week that my father, who named me Maximilian, did not even graduate from high school. And I come from a very working class background. And so when I would come home from college, my parents would often say, so now you're learning everything, now you know everything. Certainly when I went and got a doctorate. But many people know that PhD can stand for other things than just a doctorate, and we won't demean people with a PhD. But the idea is that you think that you know everything, and what we learn often in research is that we really don't know as much as we think we do. So this slide says the major theories of why we age. A theory is kind of like a guess. It's just, if you have a PhD, it's a theory, I guess, and if you don't, it's a guess. But the first one really talks about wear and tear. And inherently, that kind of makes sense, right? If you buy a new car and you start driving it, the tires wear out, you buy a new carpet, the carpet wears out. So it says the body wears out then like an engine from use. Well, if that was really the case, then you wouldn't want to move around very much, correct? But there are elements, certainly, of that. You often hear in sports the person has so many miles or so many years on their legs. And so if they've kind of been rested or sitting on the bench, then they're not really maybe aging as much. So if we don't use it, then does it wear out less? Well, potentially. But just like a car engine, if you don't start it, the battery will die. And so then it's kind of like the human body. Most of you have already probably discovered that one of the more what I'll call diabolical aspects of aging is that when you're really young, you don't have to move around a whole lot and you don't notice that you're not moving around that much. But when you get older, if you were to sit for long periods of time, even like a couple hours sometimes, and not move around, well, you end up feeling like the Tin Man from the Wizard of Oz, like, wow, I need oil to move around, I need lubrication. So in a person like Mr. Jacinto Bonilla, he moves around obviously a great deal. And the more that he moves, the more he's able to move. There's some kind of law, I know, I'm not a scientist, but that a body in motion stays at motion, and a body at rest stays at rest. So that's kind of the issue here. When I was growing up in the early 60s, you can find things written about aging that it was really good to think about sitting in the rocking chair and just rocking away, or if people were ill, they would tell you to go to bed. If you had had a stroke, if you had a heart attack, things like this, they would say, well, poor dear, you're an invalid now and we'll take care of you. That was the worst that we could have ever done. Many of you remember they would have a baby. You'd be in the hospital sometimes for like 2 weeks. Now we have people obviously working almost right up until the time of delivery and then working right afterwards. So the idea about wear and tear, it's also being mindful of what that actually means. Younger people often don't have to make modifications when they are exercising. People, even middle-aged people, make modifications when they're doing things. I've touched on this last week about I wear like knee supports and I change my shoes all the time in walking my big 75-pound husky, which people want to see a picture of him, and we'll have a picture in a future show. So our next point on the slide is it's programmed into us. So this too is where I had said we're not going to ever really talk about anti-aging on this show, because there's no such thing as anti-aging. Aging is a normal and natural process that happens throughout nature. I have a friend who is an elementary grammar school teacher, and she often has the students go out and look at aging in nature. She has them go and pick up, like in the fall, the leaves that have fallen from the tree, and certainly we're recording right now in springtime, getting them to see all the new buds and the new growth, but all that new growth will die at some point, as we will all die. So this next theory has to do with it's programmed into our cells. And when you discover something, as you probably are aware, you get to have your name associated with it. So Dr. Leonard Hayflick, he was the one. We call it the Hayflick limit. And so when you'll hear about taking anti-aging remedies and we want to live forever, some people call, Western culture the culture of greed. It's like if 1 is good, 5 is better. And you'll even hear this asking people like they don't want to age, so we'll live forever. But if you actually really ask people that are in chronic debilitating pain, as some of you sadly might be out there watching this in your 60s and your 70s, who would want to live forever like that? So it's obviously a quality of life issue too. One of the things I'm wanting you to get from these programs is it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. If you can get a geriatric professional to really evaluate you, it's possible that some of the pain that you're having could be taken away or at least lessened. So continuing on this slide, it's programmed into us, as it is in all creatures on the planet, even in the plants. They only live so long. All of you that do have pets, wouldn't it be great to have a doggy that could live for 70 years? Wouldn't it be great to have a kitty that could live maybe to 50? Doesn't work that way. It's programmed into their cells. So in human beings, and some of you have said in other talks I've given that if you believe in like Methuselah perhaps lived like to 800, 900 years, but in more modern times, probably the people who have lived the longest are a little bit over 110. There was a woman, Jeanne Calment, who was from France that was touted as living to 122, and I even used to talk about her, but now there's a little bit of evidence that maybe that wasn't true, that she herself died at 59, and her daughter, this is a really kind of interesting story, her daughter assumed her identity, and the daughter lived a little bit over 100. But the point being is that we are limited by our species of how many times that our cells can divide, which is what aging is. It starts at conception. And so you're really not going to have people much over like 110, 111, maybe 115, very rare individuals. And we'll be having a whole show on centenarians, that's people over 100. It's hard to find people that old that are not upbeat, happy, moving around, doing things on their own. Last statistic that I read, there's over 6,000 people over 100 in California alone. And the majority of those people live alone. But they are open to assistance. So that means that they're open to having people come in and help them with cooking, cleaning, shopping, personal hygiene, driving, those kinds of things. Because one of the aspects of learning how to age well is accepting assistance. We all start off the beginning of life, whether we like it or not, as humans who are one of the most dependent creatures on the planet, right? Some creatures, they're born, they hatch out of eggs, they fly away, they swim away. Our brain is not even fully formed in terms of all the parts of it until we're 5 years old. This is why some people used to say 6 is like the age of reason. So we're constantly growing and changing and developing, but not for forever. And who would want to live forever? I don't know. But we still are looking at that. The next aspect on this slide are what are called HeLa cells. And these are cells that are involved in cancer. A lot of you know that in cancer itself, the cells don't know when to stop. It's like there's too much of a good thing. I cut my finger this weekend doing some weeding. I was weeding outside. I have a property. I was weeding for about 3 hours. And I showed that I'm older because my skin is a little bit thinner. And so it was wearing out a little bit. So it's going to fill in a little bit on my finger, and then it's going to stop. But if it was cancer cells, they just continue to divide, divide, divide. And so what this talks about is these researchers took these cells outside of the human body and saw if they would just continue to divide kind of forever, and they did. Because one theory about what happens is that we run out of room, kind of like inside our body. The cells are constantly dividing, 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 and then they become kind of like waste material, and that there's no kind of place for them to go. One theory, even something like Alzheimer's disease, there's too many like dead and dying cells in the brain, and it's an enclosed space, and there's no place for it to go. Notice, though, that's just a theory. And theories, again, is a fancy way of saying that we don't really know for sure. So anybody who tells you, I have the miracle of stopping aging, and I know exactly why it happens, well, all these researchers from around the world would really like to know, and why doesn't that person essentially have the Nobel Prize, is what I'm saying, right, if you figured all this out. One of the aspects often we know of actually being younger is we tend to turn things that are quite complicated into something that's very, very difficult. And it could be all of these different things. It doesn't just have to be one. The next theory on here is an accumulation of free radicals. And radicals sounds like something, I don't know, people like outside protesting, or they're like being radicalized or whatever. Maybe this will kind of radicalize you in realizing that some of you take antioxidants. I love to ask audiences, do you take antioxidants? And the majority of people raise their hand, yes, I do, yes, I do. I say, well, why are you against oxidants? What did they do to you? And then people kind of put their heads down like they're not really sure. So somehow you've gotten the idea that oxidants are bad for you, so you want to take products that are against them, but you don't really understand why. So now I'm going to tell you why. Radicals are in the environment. They're constantly like bombarding us, the oxygen that we breathe, not just the sun, not just pollution, but just the oxygen itself. And some of you know that if you were to have I had a banana up here as a prop, and I take a bite of it, it changes like the peel when I open it. If I had an apple and I take a bite out of it, it changes how it looks. It's no longer white anymore. It's like kind of brown. And that's an interaction with the oxygen. That's all that is oxidization. If you live in a place where there's salt in the air, like near a salt, the ocean or a lake or something like that that has salt in it, that has like runoff from the ocean, you're going to see a lot of things rusting out. That's the interaction of the salt and the oxygen and the water. So is that something that happens to us, is what this theory says. Like so many things, right, life is not fair. When you're a little tiny kid, you could scrunch up your face like this for a really long period of time, and your parents might say to you, you're going to get wrinkles. But you're not going to get wrinkles because your face is so flexible, and you could probably sit like that for 5 minutes and not get wrinkles. So one of the beliefs about what's happening is that we're constantly bombarded with all of this oxygen, day after day, day after day, week, month, decade, and that it breaks down our skin, and that we don't have the defenses against it the way we once did. So like so many things, it's like you need more of a defense as you get older, and you end up kind of having less of a defense. And again, this is just a theory. So when you take antioxidants, which can be, in dark leafy vegetables, spinach, kale, things like that, dark blueberries like raspberries, strawberries, these kinds of things, theoretically that's going to help you to build up your oxidant defenses. So that's why you're taking all those kinds of things. But I always like to say, and I'm really like an amateur kind of history buff, I always like to say that 100 years ago, we thought that smoking was really good for us, like smoking nicotine. You can find that doctors would even prescribe this for people. And my story in the last program about Jack LaLanne, the exercise guru, he wanted to open this gym in Manhattan, in New York City, and not allow smoking because he thought it was bad for people. And the people that were going to grant him a permit said, no, we can't do that. After doing all this calisthenics and moving around, you need a cigarette to help you to relax. So 100 years from now, people may look back on our idea about the oxidization, the oxidants, and say, boy, that was really silly. Like, what were they thinking? The last thing on this slide has to do with what you can see in the skin, where people get these age spots. And part of what's also going on with that is you're constantly making copies of yourself. You start off, right, in conception, making copies of yourself, and you just continue until you're 115. But kind of like if you were using a copy machine, when you get to like the 1 trillionth copy, it doesn't look as much like the original. So this, again, is our theory about what aging is that you start to get like little problems, you get little growths, you get little inadequacies somehow. The toner kind of breaks down is one way of looking at it. So you can get more, quote, age spots. And the interaction, we believe, with your genetics, how you age, again, as I said last time, is how well you picture ancestors, also where you live. I'm a very fair-skinned person. I grew up in San Diego. Way back in the day, what we used to do is put like oil on our skin, believe it or not. We never wanted to get like our sun on our nose and get a sunburn. So people would put like zinc oxide on your nose. Everybody had like a white stuff on their nose. But people would just like fry out in the sun. And then part of what would happen is that's damaging your skin and making it more likely that you get these age spots. A long, long time ago, people that had darker skin, that have kind of like a natural protection factor against the sun, would live like close to the equator. And then all of a sudden we had like lighter skinned people moving closer to the equator. So then you're getting more potentially skin cancers, things like this, which is not part of normal aging. So even the age spots themselves, a lot to do with interaction with the environment. Back a long time ago, people would wear hats and gloves and things like this. And it was very much seen as like a stigma to have any kind of these age spots. It meant that you were outside. It was associated with doing some sort of manual labor. It was a class-based thing in some settings hundreds of years ago, as well as the idea that you were outside and you were being exposed to the sun. Cataracts are kind of a depositing of waste material on the lens of the eye. And here in Southern California, people get a whole lot of cataracts. And in some African countries, there's amazing stories of doctors going there and restoring people's vision that had really bad cataracts. So cataracts come as an interaction with light, an intense light. So the closer you are to the equator, the more intense the sun is. It is not part of normal aging. A lot of people that live like, in Scandinavia, for example, or the higher north, again, you go, the sun tends to be much less intense, even in the middle of the summer when the days can be really long. You don't see as many cataracts. And memory impairment, we'll be doing at least a couple of shows on memory, because I know everybody's worried about memory. But as Albert Einstein was quoted as saying, you have to remember as long as you know how to look it up. And these shows, I don't know how long Facebook will be around and YouTube will be around, but they're going to be on there for you to go back and look things up. So you don't need to remember. Your brain is clogged with so much information from your childhood, from adolescence, everything that you did, your friends, the places that you went, the schools that you went to, all of that stuff stays in your brain for like a lifetime. And unlike a computer or a cell phone where you can take out the memory, you can't really get rid of memory unless you have like a brain tumor or some kind of head injury. So the belief, again, is that maybe even memory impairment has to do somehow with interaction with the environment. And that if we're in a tough environment, if we're in a polluted environment, if we're in an environment with intense sun, perhaps this makes a big difference. And notice how I say perhaps. So now we're going to take a little break and go back and see a little bit more of this amazing gentleman, Mr. Jacinto Bonilla, and what he also has going on in his life besides doing CrossFit.
Gym members more than half his age.
At 77 years old, why push yourself this hard?
Because I like it. I love it. And I want to stay out of the nursing home.
Bonilla is the oldest man to compete in the CrossFit Games, going up against men a decade younger. CrossFit is the fastest growing fitness movement in the world. In 2008, Bonilla stopped training for 2 months to take on his biggest challenge yet. He was fighting prostate cancer.
I get a little bit.
So what I liked about showing you that part is that, we can look up to people like this gentleman and say, even younger people don't really want to do these kinds of things. Have you ever seen anyone do this kind of CrossFit training? It's just amazing, where they're jumping up on top of things, climbing ropes, doing barbells, doing kettle swings, all these things that maybe some of you guys who don't go to gym, you don't care about, but that this gentleman was not 100% healthy. And a lot of people think that folks that do these amazing things, what are called like master athletes, even though I don't like to call women master athletes, but I don't know what the corollary is, like mistress athletes, it doesn't sound right. The idea that somehow they're 100% healthy, they're not. They all have something typically, and that's part of normal aging, is that we adjust to these physical challenges. But a lot of what I really like about his story, and certainly as part of the 21st century, is you don't take to bed, you don't sit in a rocking chair, you don't give into it. You literally find a way to say, I'll get treatment, I'm going to go on, I'm going to feel better. As I touched on last week, that a lot of what I do as a psychologist with older adults is empowerment, feeling good about who you are, living in a culture that makes fun of you. It's really hard to do that, right? When you get these birthday cards that mock you and talk about your skin wrinkling and you looking really bad and you don't look like you used to. I see this everywhere, these birthday cards that are really, if we mocked any other group like that, in terms of race, ethnicity, background, where they live, people would file lawsuits. Yet, ironically, this aging does happen to everybody. It starts at conception. I also believe that a lot of what goes on is we don't value the wisdom of older adults. And I was watching this program of Dr. Sanjay Gupta has on chasing life. And he was talking about this Amara people, Aymara people of the Andes. And it was an amazing story in that they have this history going back hundreds, if not thousands of years of how to weave in very intricate ways. And they're able to weave this device that is very helpful for children that have like this hole in their heart. Dr. Gupta was explaining that most of us, when we're in the womb, have a hole in our heart, but by the time that we're born and we start taking our first breaths on our own, that it closes up. But in people born in high altitude, which can be like in places they're talking about there in Bolivia, 12,000 feet. A lot of children that also live in other places that are high elevation, they have this same problem. And so he said that they've tried with engineering and all these software things to try to replicate this weaving design, and they cannot do it. So they employ these Amara people to weave these little devices. You can look this up online. And why I like that story so much as a gerontologist is here was a way for us to value the elderly, to value the seniors, to value the richness of their tradition and put it into the 21st century. Because that's a lot of what's really lacking in more modern culture is we don't perceive that what people knew or know about has any value today. I mean, so I grew up watching like black and white television. Who cares about that? Who cares about things from my past and how we did things? A stereotype, again, is that the older people say, well, we had it tougher, you know, we walked in the snow and did all this stuff. And sometimes I think that's in reaction to them feeling dismissed, as if what they do is not of any value. We just had, this time of year, these two holidays happen at the same time, Easter and Passover, and I started hearing from a lot of my clients that they feel really shut out in their families, that they go to these family gatherings and people are very nice to them and solicitous, and they kind of say, here, grandma, you know, here, oma, here, nana, whatever term is used, or for grandpa, papa, go and sit down and we'll wait on you. And then they feel very cut off from the family. They feel very much like people are just kind of up and talking amongst themselves, talking quickly, not really looking at the people. And the seniors infer that what they have to say or what's going on with their life is not of any value or any importance. And some of you out there probably have felt that. So I'm often advising or suggesting to my clients, let people know that. Let people know that you want to be part of the conversation. And I'll still get this kind of pushback from my clients that, no, they don't really care about what's going on with me. They love me. They're concerned about me. But, you know, I'm like 85 years old, and what do I have of any value? And it's just, it hurts my heart in a way as I think, my goodness, all the problems that younger people could be having with relationships, with finances, with their job, even with their commute, decisions that they're making. Seniors are like nature. They either adapt or they die. The seniors out there, you know that you have a lot of wisdom about all those things that way surpasses any kind of technological information. Because even this technology, right? 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we only need to know about it because we'll have something to replace it. It's very obsolete. It's almost manufactured obsolete, as we say. And these larger issues about how to do things, you know how to do it. You know how to share it if people give you a chance. So finishing up with our theories of why we age. Next slide. The immune system. That's probably the number one theory right now, even though, again, it doesn't just have to be one. It could be a combination. And I'm just showing you the major theories. There's a lot of minor ones. So, again, when somebody says to you, I know exactly why this is happening to you, they can't possibly know why it's exactly happening to you. So the immune system. We often start off life in a certain way, and if we live a long time, we end life in the exact same way. So children around the world, it's a big deal, not just because their brain is fully formed at 5 years old. It's a big deal if they even make it to their 5th birthday, because your immune system is really, really fragile when you're born. This is why we're very concerned often about immunizations, vaccinations. I know that's kind of become controversial nowadays because children are really not able to fight off a lot of illnesses that younger people, younger adults certainly can. In this graph here, you'll see that this thymus gland, which is like a little gland kind of back your neck here, that it's very small when you're born. And this is in grams, it shows you here. It's like 15 grams. So that's why you're so fragile. Notice that then it becomes gigantic. It goes up to like 35 grams at puberty and stays there pretty much like through teenage years. So even though they're always telling people don't try this at home, teenagers, right, they act like they're going to live forever. They can do anything. You know, we send people, young adults, into combat. They go through an incredible, like, experiences like that, sleep deprivation, all kinds of traumatic events, and their body holds up. This is part of the reason why, because they're very robust as they become very fertile people to pass on the species, we could say. It's good that you're robust. But even by the time that you're 25, look at how it's starting to shrink and just continues to shrink. I do, though, always say this in any kind of graph or table. You are an individual. You are aging in your own way. So there are some little tiny kids that are very, very healthy and robust that probably could be exposed to all kinds of germs and problems and bacteria, and it doesn't harm them. Other people are far more fragile and are just kind of born in a very fragile state. We're learning interesting things like even about addiction, that people who are likely to become addicted to whatever we want to talk about addictions just tend to be a lot more fragile even at the time of birth and potentially even before birth. So this fragility can be a very individual thing to you. But so this illness, again, makes sense that you start off life kind of with having more tendency to become ill and needing more what I always call tender loving care. And we certainly give that to children, right? You'll see these wonderful parents having these big bags of stuff that they carry everywhere to make sure their kids have food and diapers and feedings at different times and their bottle and whatnot, and breastfeeding and making sure that they're doing all that. The same thing happens when you get to be older. You need a lot more tender loving care. But in a youth-oriented culture, people don't want to do that, in my experience, because they don't want to admit that they're older. Like, what is older? I'm going to be celebrating my 60th birthday on this show in about 6 weeks. What is older? That used to seem, when you were a kid, like really ancient kind of person. So part of what I'm going to work with all of you on, if you're open to it, is embracing the age that you are, acknowledging the age that you are. In this island I mentioned last week, Okinawa, where people live longer than any other place on the planet, this island off the coast of Japan, the people announce their age when they're introduced to you. Can you imagine doing that, especially like where we are here in Hollywood? People shave off the years. They used to say, this was like an old entertainer, one of the Gabor sisters, it may have been Zsa Zsa Gabor, that she had changed her age so many times she didn't even know how old she was. And I guess that's kind of what we strive for, right? That people want to know how old you are if you could look good for your age, meaning that you look younger than you are. So we have an increase in illness as we get older. And so if you don't manage that, if you don't take care of that, that's going to make you feel really old. But it's really not the aging that's doing it. It's the illness. And how do you become more ill? Well, we're learning again in science, it's are you getting a good night's sleep? And not necessarily taking medications to help you sleep, but are you getting a good night's sleep? Hopefully we can do a program on sleep and what that means, because sleep does change throughout the lifespan. I was trained at USC in what's called lifespan developmental psychology, LSD, LSD psychology, which means that we're constantly growing and changing throughout life. We start off life, for all of your parents out there, knowing that children do not go to sleep and sleep like 8 hours and then wake up. They can sleep like 16, 18 hours, but it's very interrupted sleep. All of you parents of teenagers know it's hard to wake them up in the morning, that they want to go to sleep at like 2 a.m. and wake up at 2 p.m. And you're not at that stage in your life, parents out there. You're typically going to bed at like 10 p.m. and waking up at 6 or 7 a.m. and thinking, oh, my children, how are they ever going to mount anything because they're still in bed for hours and hours after me? So it continues to change like that. And even though there's kind of mixed information about this, what I have found in almost 30 years of practice is as you get older, you just don't sleep as many hours at night. You don't sleep as deeply. You have to get up and use the bathroom, to urinate typically at least 1 or 2 times. That's normal. If it's more than that, there's probably something going on that could be fixed somehow or ameliorated or treated with medication. And so you're going to take a nap or two during the day. This is entirely normal, entirely normal. The last thing on there is probably the biggest of all, the inflammatory response. And what does that mean? That means that you're stressed out, is what it means. And that, like so many things, we're finding we get to different roads from the same place, that we're all kind of getting to this road of inflammation. Every different kind of research, whether it's in cancer, heart disease, what are called neurocognitive disorders, used to be called dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, this kind of stuff. What the heck does that mean, inflammatory response? It's probably what goes on when we're stressed out and we're not sleeping well and we're spending hours like driving on the freeway. We're overly caffeinated, right? We have all these like energy drinks. So what does that mean for an older person who's maybe not working? Maybe it's that you don't have purpose. You don't feel that you have life. You go to a family gathering and people don't talk to you. And you feel like, why am I even here? Why am I still alive? That creates a lot of inflammatory response. So I'm going to take a break from our slide here and go back and show you the last section of Mr. Bonilla talking about inflammatory response.
Emotional on this.
Why?
I always been in healthy shape. I always watched what I ate, and I came down with prostate cancer, and I had it taken out, and then I started coming back.
Now cancer-free, Bonilla has challenged CrossFitters around the world. Each year, they mark his birthday by doing 6 exercises like push-ups, squats, and the kettlebell swing to match his age.
If I do it this year, all the exercises would be 78 times.
In one sitting?
In one sitting.
Oh, give me that last one.
2 years ago, when no one would give him a job as a CrossFit trainer,
So why did I say inflammatory response before showing that to you? Even though this gentleman is an incredibly radical, there's no word for you, shape, I suspect it was very hard for him to feel discriminated against. He talks about overcoming prostate cancer, and if you get to see the entire clip, he went viral at least about a year ago, where he discusses how hard this was for him to cope with illness when he's taken such good care of himself. It goes on to show that in New York City, nobody would give him a job. No one would allow him to work in a gym, be a trainer for anybody. So part of, again, what you often see in elderly people, like many of you out there, you're adaptive, you're flexible, you don't give up. He built a gym in his basement and now has clients. And there's a younger man on there who's been a Navy SEAL who says, why wouldn't I go to him? Why wouldn't I access his wisdom and experience? And so that's kind of a question I always have, if I had a problem, would I want to ask a younger person or an older person? I know I'm a gerontologist, so I have that bias, but it's the same kind of thing I'm often kind of asking my clients that think that their children can help them. I'll say the age difference is still the same, right? If the age difference between you and your child is 25, 30, 35, it's always going to be the same. So how is the child going to know information that's helpful for you? They can probably look it up perhaps, but they're not really in a position to advise you. You want somebody older, wiser, or at least somebody who's been formally trained, because I know most of you have never taken a gerontology class when you try to help your parents. So back to the inflammatory response. Mr. Bonilla found a way to cope by creating his own gym and now hopefully has clients. But my concern is when we're ageist towards people, when we treat people in a negative way, when we give them these greeting cards or we marginalize them or dismiss what they have to say. I know when I got a new phone a few weeks ago, I felt very patronized in the store where they're like, well, sir, what kind of phone did you have before? Well, I'll look it up for you. I know you probably don't know. Well, if you have any other questions, we're going to be here and we can help you install the applications. And that's literally the way that they're talking to me. They don't even realize that they're doing it. So this inflammatory response, we believe, contributes to diabetes, which really creates a lot of problems as you get older. It is not part of normal aging. And heart disease. Imagine if you were stressed out all the time, worrying about your future. Who's going to care for me as I get older? Who's going to be there for me? What am I going to do today? All of you that didn't really want to get up today and said, wow, I'm going to stay in bed and it'd be so wonderful to do that. Imagine if nobody cared if you got up. That's the problem when you retire, right? Nobody cares if you get up. So do you have a purpose? Do you have things that you're doing? A lot of the clips I'm going to be showing you throughout these programs in the future are these inspiring people that find a way to have a purpose and identity to go on. We used to very much also believe that, like with Mr. Bonilla, that if you exercised, you needed to kind of been doing it throughout your entire life. And that's not the case anymore. The idea now is that you could start to do things like in midlife. There's a woman that's the oldest yoga teacher, and she's gone out there viral because now she's 100 years old. She didn't start teaching yoga until she was in her mid-80s. So that's, again, defying what we used to believe is that, you had to start when you were young to be doing all these things. And I know even when I started doing hiking, like long-distance remote backpacking in my mid-40s, I had a number of people literally say to me without realizing what they were actually saying, I think, well, Max, you're pretty old to be starting to do something like that. And I think, my goodness, this is what the culture has become, right? That somehow you can't start to do things in your mid-40s, that somehow that's too old. Well, I would think that would be an incredibly negative thing to be looking out into the future and seeing that you're too old to start to do things. If anybody says that to you, you can ask them, how long are you going to live? Because that would be the only way that you'd know that maybe you're too old to start doing something. Many years ago, when I was doing my postdoctoral training at Stanford University and the Older Adult Family Resource Center in Palo Alto, California, we would have a pain clinic, mostly for older adults. And in exchange for all this treatment that they got, they had to keep logs, old-fashioned written logs, way back in the 1980s. And this has been shown over and over and over again. We would ask people to track their pain on a regular basis, a daily basis. And what we found over thousands of people was that when the grandchildren came to visit, their pain level was at its lowest. And we were kind of astounded by that, of what we call how robust that finding was. But it was that they were out of themselves, right? Any of you that are around children, they're in the moment right now. Animals also very much in the moment. Having a dog, having a cat, having a bird takes you away from all your ruminating, agonizing, worrying about things. But what was really amazing is, despite they were in physical therapy, they took pain medication, it was nearly being around young people and being present for the younger people that gave their pain the lowest rankings of all. So the overarching theme today is that we don't really know why aging happens, but it's aging even as I'm sitting here. Next week, when we have a repeat of one of these shows that we've started with, it's going to be same kind of thing, right? We're aging. There's nothing that we can do to stop it. We don't even really understand why it does happen. So I would just throw caution to the wind if it was me and say, don't think about it, don't agonize about it. People over 100, when you ask, have they really taken good care of themselves? They look at the camera and say, no, I just kind of lived my life. I did things in moderation, if that's kind of what worked for me. We are going to be having the week after a guest talking about acupuncture, which is an ancient form of treatment for pain. So again, when look at new things, how about the fact that many ancient techniques like yoga, qigong, tai chi, and acupuncture are found to be as effective, if not sometimes more effective, than modern treatments. This again is a bow to our ancestors, and certainly not saying that what we knew in the past was somehow not relevant to today. It's kind of like organic stuff. I'll pick on that for a few minutes, where that became like the modern thing to have organic food. My goodness, if you go back to pre-pesticide eras, everything was organic. People grew their own fruits and vegetables. They had their own farm animals. It's like it's nothing new. But I find, again, as a history buff and a gerontologist, we have a very short-sighted view of history. It's as if we don't really even know these things. It's as if this is the latest thing to do these things, and so we're hip and we're cool and we're edgy and we're modern doing it, and we're forgetting that people did this for really long periods of time. So today, as we're wrapping up this show, I want to just review what the premise is, to empower you and the older people in your life to look in the mirror and not see the loss and the changes in a negative way. Native American culture, we ask you for your wisdom when you had your first wrinkle. That was something to celebrate. You still have a lot of things that you can contribute, offer to your children, to your grandchildren, certainly in volunteering to help others, or going back to work and being employed. Now you can be employed, right, sitting in your bedroom doing things. It's not as if life slows down in a way like it used to, because now you can even just watching this from your bedroom hopefully feel better about yourself, because we all are aging. It isn't just you who are older who are doing that. You're the ones who know how to do it well. If you're older than I am, you're doing it well. You're still alive. Maybe from watching this program, you can learn how to tweak it, modify a little bit, but I don't presume to have the answers. Certainly for those of you out there over 85, honor what you know. Instead of thinking about, well, young people think I don't know much of anything. You know a great, great deal. You are the wise elders. I love doing family therapy sessions where I tell people they're the wise elder. And even like a much smaller person who's been sitting kind of hunched over when I say that, they stand up straight like this, they put their shoulders back, and it's as if all of a sudden they are now the matriarch or patriarch of the family, because they haven't been treated that way by the culture, by society. They haven't been feeling that well about themselves. And so it's up to you in a way to kind of reinvigorate that and teach people as much as you're able. The old Aretha Franklin song, to have respect you, the wise elder, and learning to respect yourself, which again, I know it's hard when you get these birthday cards where you just kind of laugh and say, oh, thank you for being so critical of me and putting me down, and certainly making fun of my sex life and all these kinds of things that are on there. So I appreciate, again, you hanging in through the whole show. I'm hoping, again, that it's not too academic, because that can be a real problem when I have so much education and all this stuff. So whenever you have questions, feel free, please, to ask them, because that's my error if I say things in like a too PhD kind of way, because most people don't have PhDs. Most people wouldn't want to have PhDs, because we know like a little tiny bit, right, about, I'm saying that backwards, we know a lot about a little tiny topic. And yet I do think that aging, in my bias, is relevant for all of you to know about, because we're actually all doing it. We're all out there doing it. It's to learn how to embrace it and to feel good about it. So then people can compliment you in this youth-oriented culture and say, my goodness, you were out there like weeding for 3 hours at your age. How the heck did you do that? Or how did you climb like way over 14,000 feet to climb Mount Whitney? People have asked me that at your age. It's not that it's an accomplishment. It's more of an accomplishment because old people are not supposed to be able to do things like that. Or literally just being on this show and trying to do something new that I've not ever done before. I'm inspired so much by the wise elders that I have written about in my 2 books, that I'll be sending a link that you can look at those books if you want, about my clients. And just, they amaze me. I learn so many things from them. And they'll come in and act like they don't know anything because they're old, or their doctor has referred them because they're old, this kind of thing. It's just so much an epidemic, as we know, especially in Western culture with all our technology, of how we just kind of go on and think it's all right to say, little old man, little old lady, we'll put you in a home and we'll take care of you. Instead of, I think that all of you elders could actually be taken care of, at least in a nurturing psychological way. You could be taking care of the children, the grandchildren in your families, far better than them struggling to take care of you, because they really don't know how to do that. They still are, again, the same age difference that they've always been with you. So to all you adult children out there, please try to find resources to help you. This is a huge burden, you trying to help somebody who's so much older and wiser than you are. There's an old saying that age and treachery can overcome youth and skill. And I don't know that I would want to emphasize the treachery part, but you can again even see this reflected in sports. that some of the, quote, aging athletes, as they'll call them, they may not be as fast and their reaction time may not be what it once was, but they're able to learn things that they didn't know when they were younger, and then they overcome the younger people. You can see this most recently as last year in the Super Bowl, they talked about that. Last week I talked about Tiger Woods. They kept talking about how he knew the Masters golf course better than anybody else from how well he had done when he was younger. So this is, again, part of what we all do, is we adapt, we modify what we do. We're just more clever in so many ways. And that's what we can do to point out for younger people, is maybe you'd want to just kind of modify what you're doing this way or that way. But I find, again, with my clients, they're skittish. They're terrified that they don't want to hurt their children's feelings, or that they don't feel like they really know anything. You know more than younger people. You've forgotten the old saying, more than younger people have learned, and yet you kind of don't realize that. So my job here is to, quote, remind you, no pun intended, to feel good about what you know. Despite all these medical things that are going on, honor yourself. Thank you so much for your attention, and I remind you again that you can watch this on YouTube and iTunes and Spotify, and we're on Facebook probably for a long time. Who knows? Thank you.